And we're back. I really hope you enjoyed the music. We've been having some great music tonight. Well, not tonight. I'm sure we'll have great music tonight. And we had great music last night and this morning. But as for now, I'm actually here with Patricia Hart. She's the executive director of Women's Space, which serves Mercer County. But I would actually rather have you talk about it and explain what Women's Space does and what you do.
Sure. I'd love to. And thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming.
And it is great music. It's totally awesome music, actually. My name is Pat Hart. I'm the executive director of Women's Space. And what Women's Space is the domestic violence and sexual assault agency for Mercer County. We also, although our main focus is Mercer County, we also run the statewide domestic violence hotline. So if anyone's calling from other places and they need to connect with a program in the state, they'll call our hotline, and our hotline can direct them or provide information or whatever it is they need. So for the most part, that's the kind of overview of what we do. The how do we do it is in any way we possibly can. So we have 5 different sites in the county. We collaborate with anyone who will collaborate with us so that we try to be everywhere. Not that that's an unrealistic goal or anything, but that's our goal.
Close a little bit.
Sure.
Like this.
Sure.
And you said 5 locations. So does that mean
Yes.
5 shelters, 5 counseling centers?
We have 1 emergency shelter.
Okay.
We have a short-term transitional housing program. We have a long-term transitional housing program. We have a counseling office. Our administrative office, which also houses our education and training program, our sexual assault program, and our domestic violence response team program. And then we have a program, a long-term housing program for developmentally disabled women, some of whom have children.
I work at Monavie. I've mentioned this about a million times on air. But for many of the viewers out there, they don't know what Women's Space does. They don't know domestic violence, what kind of violence. Could you just sort of clarify a little bit
Sure.
what situations you're really here to serve for?
Domestic violence and sexual assault. So pretty much, we believe that everyone deserves to feel safe in their home. We also think they should feel safe on the street.
Yes.
But in terms of the domestic violence, anyone who's in a relationship, either a current relationship, a former relationship, a marriage, a boyfriend, whatever, they could be roommates, they could be same-sex couple, a relationship where they've lived together or had children together. Many different things qualify in terms of identifying who or what. But the domestic violence is feeling harmed or scared or frightened, and it doesn't necessarily mean being hit. It could be that, and of course, that's very clear. Sometimes what isn't clear is the kind of terrorism that happens without ever striking a blow, and that can be through threats, it can be through intimidation and isolation, it can be threats to harm other people in your life who are very important to you. So domestic violence really runs the gamut from extreme physical harm to sexual violence to terroristic threats to harassment. So there's stalking. There's a wide range of what qualifies as domestic violence.
And domestic violence, the thing is that it's actually, unfortunately, quite creative of the many different ways you can abuse somebody. And I think that unless you've sort of become indoctrinated in this field by working with people who face domestic violence, you really don't understand the extent of what really goes on. And I'm definitely going to ask you more about yourself. Patricia is somebody I've heard of many times through my own executive director, so I'm very excited to actually hear your own stories and background. But one thing I think is that hasn't really been, I mean, maybe it's been addressed. I know on Oprah and lots of these shows, the Rihanna Chris Brown thing, it's been talked maybe to death. I don't know if it's been talked about right or wrong, but other issues of DV just on the national forefront. I think the one thing I've sort of missed, I've looked at these shows through a different lens because I've only been doing this work since June, through a different lens, and I've been a bit disappointed because I felt that, and I'm sure you've seen this, there's a lot of victim blaming.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's not blaming her for the abuse, obviously that most people agree that abuse is bad, the whole thing and the whole idea, and I will say that personally I maybe have had this idea before that, come on, why isn't she leaving? what's wrong with her, this guy. I mean, there's cases where a guy will set someone on fire and she still stays. And at that point, people are just saying, she deserves it at this point. I mean, she's still staying. I just sort of wanted you to maybe just, for the people who are out there, to sort of give an idea of why do women stay? And not because they're stupid and not because they're just victimized. I mean, I know we could talk about this for 3 hours, but I just sort of wanted, the point is I want people out there to sort of see at least a glimpse of what we deal with.
Right. First of all, if there's one thing that I would love to get across to people, that if never again I had to hear the question, why doesn't she just leave? I will feel like my job has been done. It's been done. If someone would say, what in the world gives him the right to think he can hit her? That would be success. Because the minute we shift that paradigm off of her and put it where it belongs, on the person who's perpetrating the violence, we've met with success. So much of the problem is just blaming someone for a situation over which they have no control. So domestic violence, and sexual assault. People see sexual assault as the guy jumping out of the bushes and raping the woman, which is not true. The lion's share of sexual assaults occur from someone that the victim knows, by someone that the victim knows. And so, what's wrong with her? Didn't she know? So, bad question, bad question. The truth is, something like a domestic violence relationship, it evolves over time. It's insidious. If you were going on a first date and you answered the door and the guy you were going to see was standing there on the welcome mat, and when you opened the door, he punched you right in the face. Well, nobody would go on a second date. Of course not, right? I mean, it doesn't happen that way. It would be so good if there was a little sign, look, I'm an abuser, trust me. But it doesn't happen, and the reality is that abusers are very good at what they do. It's a manipulative, over time, breaking down of the victim's spirit, the isolation of the victim, so that she no longer can check out with friends and family what's going on. Because at this point, she's already been told that her family doesn't care about her as much as he does, that her family doesn't love her, that they're just trying to hurt her, that they're jealous of her. Whatever it takes, because it's no one-size-fits-all, by the way, but it's a very insidious process of isolating someone, of breaking down their spirit, of putting them down to the point where they really believe that no one else will love them, that they're not worthy, that they deserve what's happening to them. And the thing that's really important to know about that, if you're listening to this and you think, well, that could never happen to me, I really am here to tell you it could happen to any of us. Any one of us, myself included. It can happen to anyone because it isn't so obvious. You can be smart, you can be rich, you can be beautiful, and you can still fall prey to someone who systematically retrains you to believe that you deserve what you're getting.
Exactly. And I had to go through a 40-hour domestic violence response training, and the only reason I'm sharing this as a young person, and just anybody who is now working with violence, with violence against women, is that fact that you just said, that it can happen to all of us. No one wants to accept that, especially as girls. That, we're empowered, we're strong, look, we're working, I'm smart, I went to Rutgers, I'm a feminist, all these things. And so that exempts us from that situation, from those experiences, and it absolutely doesn't. And I think once you actually realize that that's true, let me tell you, that was really, really scary for me. Very scary, because I was never going to be that girl. Luckily, knock on wood, I've not been in that situation, but let me tell you, I know I'm not exempt, and I just need to put this out there, because one thing that really hit me hard in this training that I had to go through, the woman from Women Aware, which is a shelter, by the way, in New Brunswick, just like Women's Space, and they said, okay, so you're dating, you've been married to a guy for 5 years, everything's been great, you love him and everything, and you're suddenly fighting. He bought a motorcycle without telling you. You have a joint bank account. So you see him, you start yelling at him and everything, and then you separate. He goes upstairs, you're downstairs. You go in the hallway, you see him again, and then just seeing him sets you off. And then you just start yelling at him again, or say you make a snide comment, and he shoves you against the wall. This entire time, he's never said anything abusive to you, never laid a hand on you. What would you do? And of course, all the women in the room said something like, oh, I would freak out, I would hit him, I would leave, I would run out of the house. And of course, everybody would do that. And honestly, most women probably did do that. But okay, so it was just that. That's all it was, nothing more. He apologizes, you never saw that part of him. And then so things go on. So let's say next time you're in another fight and things escalate to that level, would you argue differently? And I said, yes. And she said, well, how? And I said, well, I would know that this set him off, so I just wouldn't go there. And that shows that the next argument, you had already accommodated yourself to avoid that. And then what about next time? What if there's not enough salt in the food? So next time, okay, I'm not going to put salt. I'm going to put not as much salt. I know he doesn't like that. Or next time, oh, I shouldn't wear that dress. I know he doesn't like it. It's a little too short. So where does that line go? And there is no line. That it's an increasingly indoctrinating, like you said. And I think another thing that I really learned, and I mean, I'm not really telling you this, you know all this, I'm sort of just putting it out there since we are in there, is that, and you know, at Montague, and I think it's similar to women's space, we don't ask, oh, why isn't she leaving? We always ask, what's preventing her from leaving? Or, you know, why is she, you know, it's more like, what is preventing her from leaving? There's something preventing her. Because nobody would be in that situation unless there was something preventing them. Is it love? Is it children? Sometimes it's not even love. It's children. It's even for a girl who loves a boyfriend. Maybe she's scared of leaving. Maybe she lost her virginity to him. Maybe there's so many things. And I think that all of us collectively, boys, girls, men, women, have to ask ourselves this because we're all part of the problem and the solution. And that's sort of why, I mean, I sort of ask you, I mean, I know it's a long, drawn-out thing. You could definitely, like I said, 40 hours domestic violence training still didn't cover a lot of things, but even a little snippet of that I think is very important for people to hear. And so just to switch gears, I mean, I talk a lot, and I'm interviewing you, but but I really wanted to ask you, just out of my own curiosity, what made you get into this line of work, into this position?
Can I go back to your comments
a
little bit? Let me say something and then I'll tell you because it's kind of a boring answer, but that's okay.
Go ahead, it's a free interview.
I think that all of what you said and what's so important about it is when someone can recognize for their very own self that it could happen to them. When you start to realize that you do modify your behavior to accommodate someone you love. It's what we do. If that someone we love is a perpetrator of domestic violence, that is if they're, because the other thing to really remember, this is about power and control. It's not about losing your temper. It's not about getting angry and just not being able to control. It's totally controlled. And the way we know that is that domestic violence perpetrators, when they get upset at work, they rarely punch their boss.
Exactly.
When the police come, they don't hit the police because they're angry because the police made some assumptions about them. They do it specifically to their victim, the person that they want to maintain the control over, and their children, often, over whom they have, of course, we all have control over our children. They're little, we're big. But it's about, no, it's about power and control. So the other thing that's very, very seductive is that when you start dating someone and they're jealous, how sweet is that?
Yeah. And you have the rose-colored glasses on.
It's so sweet. It's, oh, he just is a little jealous because he loves me and he doesn't want anyone else talking to me.
Some girls even try to get guys jealous. Yeah. You see that, so.
So what starts as jealousy then turns into control. And the control gets bigger. And the control gets bigger to the point where now she's isolated. So I think it's really important to know it's about power and control and that it's very seductive and that it can happen to anyone. The reason it's important to know that, the other reason, besides just that it's smart, is that if you understand it's about power and control, you understand that leaving isn't always the ultimate goal. So when a woman comes to us, we don't say, how can we help you to leave? We say, how can we help you? That woman, at that moment in time, may want to stay. She loves him. She believes him. I will tell you the one thing that women want when they come in, more than anything else. Can you guess?
Yes, they want to fix him. They want to make the situation better.
No.
Oh, isn't?
Well, they do want to do that too, but no, they just want it to get better.
Okay.
They want him to stop hitting her.
Yes.
That's all. I just want him to stop hitting me. If you can help me get there. And a part of the work is really to help her to understand, just like with everything else in our lives, we have no control over other people.
Makes sense.
So a lot of times the women who come don't want to leave. they want to be able to figure out how to work out their relationship, because that's what we do as women. We work out relationships. We're good, we're responsible for that. It's our family.
And if we don't, we might be seen as failures.
Of course, we are, because when a marriage breaks up, the woman often takes the responsibility for that. So she really just wants it to stop and it to get better. Sometimes gradually over time, I mean, not everybody. Sometimes women come in and say, I'm out of here, and you say, okay, how can I help you with that? But what I'm trying to say is, ultimately, whatever she wants to do, that's what we're going to help her. We're going to facilitate that if we can. And so, but if we're worried and we think, oh, you're in danger, we can say that too. We're really concerned about this. This behavior appears to be escalating. We're really concerned. I don't want to leave. Okay, let's talk about how to safety plan while you stay where you are, because we are concerned. And so the next step, if you know it's power and control, is to understand that that if she decides to leave and when she decides to leave, it's the most dangerous time.
Yeah.
Okay, so women who are murdered in a domestic violence relationship are about 70% of the time are murdered once they've made a plan to leave, are making a plan, or have left.
Yes.
It's a very, very dangerous, because now he's lost control. Once he's lost control, he has nothing else to lose. Right? So how often do we see those headlines? Oh, never mind. I'm not going to say that. But you see the headlines and it says, husband kills wife and children and then kills himself.
Yes.
So it's horrible. It's horrific. We never want that to happen.
And the thing is that it has nothing to do with love. And I think many times, it is the idea of love that keeps sometimes the control as well. But the idea of being in love with somebody, people think often, he's so terrible, he's done all these things, he's hit you, he's broken so, how dare you, how could you, you're so stupid, how could you keep going back? And I think this one statistic, people really don't believe me when I tell them this. It takes a woman about an average of 7 times to leave her perpetrator. Now that's an average of 7, which means an average. So it means from 1 to whatever number that it takes an average of a woman to leave 7 times. And you see that over and over. A client might come and then goes back and comes and goes back. And I think that understanding, which you mentioned, is so very important. And we always say love doesn't hurt. And in this case, it just keeps hurting over and over. But when you see things about within the 48-hour period after a woman leaves is the most dangerous period for her, is for someone to drive cross country to kill the wife and the kids and then himself. It has nothing to do with romance. It has nothing to do with love. It has nothing to do with hurt. It has everything to do with control, and it has nothing to do with anger. Anger is an emotion that everybody feels. And just like you said, if I'm angry at my sister, I don't punch her in the face. If I'm angry at my boss, I'm not punching people or anything. But why is it that for some reason there's this one person that can just take all that on for some reason? And it's a much deeper issue, and I think that that's something that in general isn't really understood or really acknowledged. I think it's really understood by not even by all people who work in domestic violence, but a lot.
We're all in process, I think, of getting it, because
Yes.
it's very hard when you're sitting with someone that you know is in imminent danger to not say, get out of there. You can't say that. That's not our decision. That's her decision. Because I'll tell you something. If you had to make a choice between staying in what might be a dangerous situation for you and your perpetrator who's promised you he's going to murder your kids if you even try to walk out that door, do you think you might make a decision to stay and keep yourself in harm's way in order to protect your children? It happens all the time. It happens all the time. The best grip that an abuser can get on his victim is to threaten who she loves. If he's threatening her, and that's very scary, and you could leave because you don't want him to kill you. But then to say, he's going to harm your children, your parents, or your dog, whatever it is that you really love, you think about that you're leaving becomes selfish. I'm going to leave, and then someone else is going to suffer. So it's a hard question. We never want to be responsible for making that decision. It's hard enough for her, and we trust her because she understands the level. She understands his level of kind of the level of which he might come to before he explodes.
Yeah, even as advocates, we're not living in her home. We're not living in her body.
know.
We don't have her feelings. We don't know what's happening.
No.
And I just think to put it in perspective for anybody out there who's listening, when you're in a relationship, what does it mean to be in love or to be in a relationship? It's to be vulnerable to somebody mutually. A man, a boy, or a man would be vulnerable to the woman if they're in love, and the woman. Well, it's about trust. It's about having this vulnerability with somebody and that emotional attachment. So, I mean, just think about even if you've been in a great relationship for 5 years. I mean, they know how to push your buttons. They know what you love. They know what you hate. Even if you're having a silly argument, they can push the right button and set you off. And that's, I mean, people who are
As
that,
can we.
that intimate, exactly. So people who are that intimate to you, to each other. You know, even with your parents, you know what button to push to really twist that knife in them. But imagine, so that's just an everyday thing. People who just are attached, who just love each other. But imagine that attachment and love, but in the hands of someone who can really use that to hurt somebody. Now that is a weapon that is more powerful than a gun, than a knife. It's that weapon I think people don't realize that is being used.
Yeah, it's very frightening. And you don't, the thing that's different when you were talking about how we argue, I mean, all of us do that. It's normal. It's normal to get angry. It's normal to try to manipulate a situation to get what you want. The difference in a relationship that is predicated on violence and power and control is that there's nothing equitable there. You know, you don't. I could say to my partner, I could say the most manipulative, horrible things. I could, and know that if I'm in a healthy, relatively healthy relationship, and know that I'm not going to lose my life over it, or that my clothes aren't going to get shredded, or that my dog isn't going to get harmed. There's a different level of equitability in a situation where there's violence. There's none of that. You never know if a leaf from the tree outside that's shedding on the floor is going to set him off, or if it's going to be greeting him at the door when he really didn't want you to greet him at the door that day, because really it has nothing to do with that behavior. So it's unpredictability. You're always off balance. When you see victims, survivors, if they behave a little bit crazy, it's because their whole world is crazy. And I put crazy in quotes because I don't really mean that. But if they seem unpredictable, their world is unpredictable because they're living with unpredictability. And they don't have the power. And I think when people ask that question, why doesn't she just leave? They assume, probably based on their own life experience, which they're very fortunate, have they not been involved in that we all have the power to make a decision with repercussions that we have control over, and we don't. So that's a struggle.
And the thing is, with domestic violence, I know since I don't know how long you have been involved in the movement, but I know from the 70s and 80s, obviously a lot has changed. Now shelters the government pays, they get government money, they get state money, and it is on the national forefront. You do see TV, I mean, people know what it is, it's on commercials, it's on TV, it's getting sponsorships and commercials. So there's obvious that now there's sort of the backlash, which is, well, men get abused, and you always hear that. What about the men? What about and it's almost like it's almost a men's movement. And again, domestic violence is never anti-men. Feminism is not anti-man. But
No.
I sort of wanted you to address that because there is this increasing movement, and that's probably the second or third question I get asked the most. What about the men? You don't work with the men. I know a guy, and his girlfriend was terrible to him, and he really, she was stalking him and all these things. And I just sort of wanted you to respond to that.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. One, men do get abused. And I will tell you, because we do the teams, and we see about 600 victims a year through our teams, which is pretty amazing, in the police departments, and we see more men. Because men don't traditionally come forward. It's a harder thing. But we do serve men. We serve all victims. So if a man needs shelter, he can't come into our shelter because it's a communal living situation, but we will work with him. We've housed men in hotels, our advocates working with them till we can find a more permanent place. We see men in our counseling office, obviously our hotlines, our teams, all of those things. We have male volunteers who go out on sexual assault call-outs, who go out on domestic violence call-outs. It's so, so important that it's an integrated picture. It's not the man that we, God forbid, that we're against. It's the violence. And we love when men come forward and stand by us, because now it's not us against men, which I think is how the movement started. People were like, oh, anti-men. Not true at all. We have many men on our board. We have a chief of police on our board.
Yeah,
It's so important. This is not a woman's issue. It really isn't. It's a human issue. So we do serve men. It does happen to men. The percentage is much, much lower in men. So, people give you all kinds of numbers, but I would really hazard a guess to say 95% are women and 5% are men. And if that's a little off, it might be. Because I'll tell you where it's a little different. We're seeing young people and violence. We are seeing what is called bi-directional violence. I don't always like that term, but it at least it describes a little bit, where the belief is if someone hits you, you hit them back. You hurt them back. There's a lot of violence we see in young people that is frightening to me. A lot of the gang stuff, and although that's totally male-dominated, but the belief that violence is an okay way to respond to violence. And so what we talk about with young people is choosing respect. Respect yourself, respect other people. Make choices that demonstrate your respect for yourself and your respect for other people, because that's frightening. The children, the young kids, and not just children, teenagers.
Mm-hmm. There's one. I went to a conference about a month ago, and they actually had a seminar on this. And there's a statistic running on. I read about it about how women are statistically. There's a statistic out there supposedly where they're just as violent as men, meaning. Women, supposedly more women hit men than men hit women. But I have read about this outside of that seminar. I wish I had something in front of me to really point that out and be more legitimate. But they found out sort of the scale that was used to determine that kind of a statistic was basically almost like a number scale where let's say you're a guy. I'm me, sort of short, not too big, and there's my boyfriend's this huge guy, and I punch him in the arm once, and he punches me in the arm once. In that scale, that was equal. But the fact that let's say my punch barely bruised him, and his punch broke my arm, that's not taken into account. So it's not the actual end result of the injury, but sort of the amount of blows or what kind of blow was given. And so let's say a woman is angry, maybe hits a guy 5 times or slaps him, which you said violence, or maybe in this statistic, even if it's in self-defense, it counts as a hit.
Because I think that's what I was going to say to you. You also want to think about, most women in prison are there, and most of the women in prison are or have been at some point victims of domestic violence or sexual assault. It's pretty pathetic. And that a woman who is convicted of murder, even with a long history of domestic violence, even if she was defending herself, will get a higher sentence than a man who's convicted of domestic violence after murdering his partner with a history of domestic violence, which he's perpetrated. It's significant. I want to say 12 to 15 for a man and something like 20 to 23 years for a woman for murder. So that to me says a little bit about societally where we are. So yeah, that kind of a rating, you always have to be careful with that data, because if you're defending yourself, and it counts as much as someone choking you, I don't know where that falls on the scale.
It falls low on the scale because
it's low.
If he's choking you, that's not a hit.
Right, exactly.
But if
someone's
she hits
choking
him,
you and you kick him and you make marks or you whatever.
It's almost like a sadistic video game. So,
Yeah.
But they're telling me to wrap up, and as uplifting as all this is. But actually, I thought this was a great conversation. We didn't get into detail about your
It's okay.
your history.
It's not that interesting.
But I think, I'm sure you'll come on again. You're great to have on. You're very personable. And before I let you go, is there anything you wanted to say, a website, number, about Women's Space?
Hotline number is 609-394-9000. That's our local hotline for domestic violence or sexual assault. Website, www.womanspace, womanspace.org. Please go there. Please phone if you need us. And just know that as one person, you can make a difference. So if you know someone, if somebody knows someone who knows someone, there really is help. And things are different in our community. We work with every police department, and they're going to respond. And if they don't, you need to call us. So don't blame people. Ask how you can help, and just know that there's help available. So
And
That's
if
probably
anything,
the most important thing.
change your mind. Just, look it up. Like, even if this made you think of something different, you hear something, look it up. It's always great to inform yourself. So
Right.
thank you so much, Patricia, for
Thank
sharing your
you. Thanks for
information
having me. It was
experience.
great. It's great
Thank you
being
so
here.
much.